The gospel is this, that because we could not save ourselves, because we could not build that bridge that has been broken, that because we cannot do it however we try, and that our success is always very limited, that God did it in His Son Jesus, that by believing in Him, trusting in Him, we know that our relationship with Jesus is restored. This is, in essence, what the gospel is. Now, when we go to the letter to Galatians, and when we read, and you know it very well, for example, we are finding a statement given by Paul, a very strong statement that kind of he goes even an extra mile in being even, I would say, rude, actually addressing people who were opposing his work in the preaching of the gospel in the churches of Galatia. And he says in Galatians chapter 1, as from verse 6, he says, I'm astonished that you are so quickly deserting the one who called you by the grace of Christ and are turning to a different gospel, which is really not gospel at all. And then he says, he uses very powerful words towards the end of this section. This is verse 8 and 9. But even if we or an angel from heaven should preach a gospel other than we preach to you, let him be eternally condemned. Why is Paul using such kind of harsh language? Because he wants to emphasize that when we talk about the gospel of Jesus, this is a serious matter. This is not as if we are talking about one point of a doctrines. This is not one of 50 things that we believe. We can say it doesn't really matter whether it's this or that. He says that the gospel of Jesus, that fact that we in Jesus have a complete salvation from the beginning to the end, without any strings attached, is so important that overrides everything else. And that we should not and never undermine this and push it in a corner as if it's irrelevant, as it is trivial. But in the heart of those three, there is one thing, and that's the gospel of Christ. There's a teaching about Jesus giving his life for us, being a complete revelation of God to us, complete salvation to us, and that this is the heart of the matter. That's what the gospel is. Has always been, it is today, and it will be up to the very last moment of this history, up to that moment when we see Jesus Christ coming in a clouds of heaven. Now, why was Paul telling this to the churches in Galatia? Because simply, Paul was going around, he was teaching, he was establishing churches, he would spend some time with them, and then he would move on to another territory, and then he would do the work again, and he would be establishing new churches there. And what would happen was that when he would stay like in Galatia for a long time, he would move elsewhere, then he would be receiving complaints, and he would receive letters that some people are coming to fix what Paul was teaching. And those people were very faithful Jews from Jerusalem. They were not secular people. They were not Jews who did not believe in Jesus. They were coming from Jerusalem, and they were coming to the churches in Galatia, and they were saying, Paul, he is a great man. It is very nice that he is teaching about Jesus, and he's right about this, but, first of all, you need to accept Judaism. Then, receiving Jesus would really make a difference in your life. Don't you ever be sure that you have the assurance of salvation just on account of what Paul was telling you. We are here to tell you that you basically have to become religious and cultural, whatever, Jews, and then Jesus is going to matter to you. So basically what they were doing, they were putting Jesus on the top of the entire body of teaching of the Old Testament, and says, if you accept this, and Jesus as an addition to this, then you are fine. But don't you think that by having Jesus you have everything that you need? Don't you dare think like this, because it's not like this. While Paul was telling them, it is actually the truth of the gospel, that actually in Jesus we have the totality of the entire package of salvation. All the intentions of the Old Testament, all the teachings of the Old Testament are here now, consumed in the person of Jesus. So when you receive the person of Jesus, you have everything. That's why gospel is about Jesus doing the complete work of salvation, but not only a part of it, not even a major part, but totality of whatever matters for our salvation and following of our Lord. So that was the essence, and I believe still remains to be the essence of the gospel. The essence of the gospel. Not the works, any kind of works, but actually simple trust in Jesus. There are so many wonderful things and so many important things. They should better be part of our Christian experience, but none of them are the truth of the gospel. None of them are the truth of the gospel. But what do we do? Point two. What do we do with the book of James? When we go to the book of James, or epistle of James, in chapter 2, where James is addressing the churches he was writing to, and he says, "Show me your faith on account of your works." James chapter 2, verses 14 to 20. You have this heart of the message of James, where he says, some people say, just believe. But I'm telling you, you need to show me your faith by your works. And theologians have been quarreling about this. So what is this? Who is right? Is Paul right? Is James right? Who of those two guys? Are they contradicting themselves? They're not contradicting themselves. They're talking about the same thing. James is telling us now that you believe what this faith has to do in your life as a response to Jesus you believe, not as a method and means of salvation. I mean, when we are really reading the epistle to James, we can easily find what the problems were there in the churches he is addressing in his letter. He's addressing the problem that in that particular community he's addressing, there were wealthy people in the church. There were wealthy people who were abusing their weaker brothers and sisters in their own church community. They were exploiting them. They were not paying them what is due for their work. But when they came to church together, they were singing together, they were praising the Lord together. You wouldn't know who is holier than who among them. And they simply thought that doing that and subscribing to certain beliefs, this is making them right with God. Nothing else is really important. And James is telling them, no. Whatever you believe ought to be visible through your life. Not through your theories about what you believe about this, what you believe about that, what you believe about this, but how, first of all, you treat your brothers and sisters who are weak, who are poor, who are not as advantaged as you are. This is what a platform is, how you actually demonstrate whether the faith you claim you have in Jesus is legitimate or whether you are just faking your faith in Jesus. And when I say you, I don't mean you here. I'm just speaking in general terms. So this was the message of James. He said, if you really believe, demonstrate this by fairly treating your, first of all, brothers and sisters that are known to you in the church, and then from there on, you can go to the others in your circle of influence. This is very important, and this is leading me to my final part. So how does this make sense today? How does this make sense in the environment we are living today? How does this make sense in a time that is becoming so much crazy, out of control? How are we actually preparing ourselves for the coming of the Lord? I mean, we can be panicking about this. We need to be ready, we need to be ready, we need to be ready, we need to be ready. But what on earth does this really mean? What does this really mean when things start getting upside down? When things start getting around us out of control? Does this mean just hiding, trying to disappearing from the scene? Does this mean not having eyes open for the challenges around us, for the people who are suffering? What does all of this mean? And I think the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 25, gives a wonderful answer to this question. And in Matthew chapter 25, we have this beautiful story, we have this beautiful metaphor, we have this beautiful parable of Jesus that I know that I mentioned from this place more than once about the judgment day and two groups of people standing in the presence of God. And why is this metaphor, why is this story, why is it important? Because it actually shows how the gospel of Jesus Christ and how, whether we have understood it, blend together into one story. In chapter 25 of the Gospel of Matthew, from verse 31, in this story about two groups of people, one to the left, to the king, who is Jesus, one to the right, and when Jesus speaks to those who are to his right and says, "Come and enjoy my presence," and he identifies himself for those who are suffering. He's not even asking a question at that point, what did you believe? But he's asking a question about how did you treat the people around yourself? How did you love me by loving each other? And you know, it is so easy to demonstrate our faith through some theoretical, conceptual, doctrinal points and how righteous or good we are by believing in this or that. It's so easy to build a little garden around ourselves and put few sticks and a fence and feel secure because we are here secure, because this stick represents this belief, this one represents this one, and this one represents this one. But the problem is that it can all be faked, but you cannot fake. I cannot fake how I treat those who are around me. Oh, how I wish when I was much younger I understood some of those things better than maybe I'm understanding now. The older I'm getting, I'm remembering things from my younger life and past, and I'm saying, Lord, I only wish I did act differently then. I only wish I treated this person differently then. I'm realizing the older I'm getting that relational things in my life are much more important. How I've treated this person or that is much more important whether I have drinking coffee or not. Much more. Because they are the true manifestation and representation of this, whether I walk with the Lord. Paul is telling us on one hand, our faith is only a matter of a simple, childlike trust in Jesus and his works, and that he was strong enough to save us completely. James is telling us, now that you know that, then be honest towards that Jesus and say to yourself, because he did this to me, what does this mean in my life, in my practical life? His giving of his life to others through cross. What does this mean to me now in my walk in life? Do I need to get on the cross to be crucified? No, but it does mean a call that I give myself as much as I can to others through loving them in a practical ways, for example. So this is where the connection is between those two, and this is nicely summarized in the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 25, where it says, verses 31 and beyond. I will just read a few of them, and you know them all. When the Son of Man comes in his glory and all the angels with him, he will sit on his throne in heavenly glory. All the nations will be gathered before him, and he will separate the people one from another. As a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats, he will put the sheep on his right and the goats on his left. Then the king will say to those on his right, "Come, you who are blessed by my Father, take your inheritance, the kingdom prepared for you since the creation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. I needed clothes, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you looked after me. I was in prison, and you came to visit me." And you know the rest. And those people are wondering, when on earth, how did we do any of these good things to you? And Jesus says, whenever you did it to the least of those people, it's the same as you did it to me. You actually did it to me. And he gave the most powerful lesson through this parable, that we really love God by how we love each other, because everything else can be easily faked, but not in the eyes of God. But nevertheless, in our eyes can be easily faked. But whether we love each other cannot be faked on a long run. That's how I understand the gospel and how it operates. And that's why I'm upset when I see injustice around me, in a community around me. I'm upset when I see how people are being mistreated nowadays, where empathy is lacking, where the world is going upside down, feeling so much overwhelmed, and constantly asking the Lord, what can I do in this? And it can be overwhelming. But nevertheless, the message still remains, even more so, that the worse the world gets around us, the more important it becomes. How do we treat others around us? Obviously, my concern or your concern should not necessarily be someone on the other part of the world, because you can't do much, but beginning with those who are accessible to us, who are near us, who we can easily ignore and not see, and then go from there onward. That's how the gospel works. That's how the gospel operates. And just in the conclusion, you know the story about forgiveness that Jesus also shared at one occasion. Another story that powerfully actually demonstrates this connection between faith and works, about what Jesus did for us and what he is expecting us to do in response to him, when in his presence came this man who owned the king lots of money. And he could never had opportunity or means to repay the king. Lot. And the king puts him in a prison, or says, I'm sending in a prison. And says, okay, I will put you there till you repay everything that you own him. And then the man is pleading with the king and says, please forgive me, give me just a little bit more time, you know. And the king forgives him everything. And we are talking about the debt that this man could never work that long or that much to ever repay that, ever. So what would be a natural response of this man? Rejoicing, praising the king, being happy out of himself that he was forgiven, if he ever understood the forgiveness, what it meant. And he goes down the steps, I'm imagining it like this, from this big auditorium, or whatever hall it was where the king was sitting. And he goes down and he sees down there, down the steps, he sees another man who owned him a few dollars. I'm saying just something insignificant, very little. And the moment he sees the man who owned him just a few dollars, he was stricken by anger and he was frustrated, and he immediately remembered that, and he comes to this man and he says, when are you going to give me back those $5? When I go, and we have now the repetition of this story again completely. This man who owns just a few dollars to this man who was forgiven a moment ago, he pleads with his and said, just give me a little bit more time. I am going to return everything to you. But this forgiven man, he is not giving in. He is not connecting what happened to him in the presence of a king, that he should now act likewise, that he should do the very thing what the king did to him, that he should now come and say, okay, you are forgiven, don't worry about this anymore. No, he's angry. He even, I don't know how he did it, but he managed to send the poor man into prison. And then people who were watching and seeing all of this go to the king and said, listen, king, this man whom you have forgiven millions of dollars, something is wrong with him. He's not getting anything out of what happened to him. And king became angry. And he calls back the forgiven man. And he basically tells to him, are you okay? Are you aware what I've done to you just maybe 20 minutes ago? Should not you have done likewise? This is the picture of connection between the grace that saves and the grace that energizes us, that we in our spheres of influence act likewise. That is king who spread his hands and he embraced this man who could not ever repay his debt, that this king, by doing so, is also telling him and every one of us now that you are forgiven and that you know what it means. Go and do likewise by loving people around you. That's how, in the simplest way, what the gospel is and how the gospel operates. And that's the kind of a gospel that I believe.